Welcome to Everything CPA and Private Equity, where we unpack the evolving relationship between accounting firms, private equity, and other strategics. I'm David Wolfskehl, a partner at Whitman Transition Advisors.
And I'm Phil Whitman, CEO of Whitman Transition Advisors. And we've chatted with more than 150 private equity groups. We've actually closed over 40 transactions with those private equity groups. And we're bringing you firsthand insights from the front lines.
And whether you're exploring your first deal, putting your toe in the water, refining your strategy, we're here to guide you with real stories, expert advice, actionable takeaways. Let's dive in.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Everything CPA and PE, where we help leadership teams get information so they can make great decisions. This is all about educating you. There's so many nuances. Phil talks about 31 flavors of ice cream. And really, in some ways, he's making it simpler by only saying 31 flavors of ice cream, because with the PE firms, and we call them PE firms, but we really mean strategic buyers rather than just PE firms, it's not only 31 different flavors of ice cream, there's 12 different cones. Right? There's 14 different kind of sprinkles. If you want hard shell chocolate, you have that as well. And the complexity of these deals is so huge.
Hey, David, I love that. You just brought back memories of me walking into a frozen yogurt shop where you go over to the table after you pick your flavors, and there really are, do you want toasted coconut on top, or,
Right.
marshmallow, or strawberries and bursting bubbles and chocolate cookie dough. I mean, it's simply amazing. And it truly is a great analogy, because if you put all the different aspects of a transaction in different columns and created a matrix and said, okay, well, if it was number 1 for this, and number 3 for the multiple, and number 7 for, where the rollover is, long-term, short-term. I mean, there's just so much. It's not just the multiple.
No. And in fact, like I always say, if somebody asks me what's the multiple, what pops in my mind is they need a lot of education, because, the multiple is a number. Economic value is dollars.
Exactly.
And, if you all walk around and say I have the highest multiple, you might not actually get the most amount of money. And oftentimes we see that you don't get the most amount of money. And we've been doing this for a long time. It still starts with chemistry and culture. So if you're going for the bucket of money with people you don't like, respect, trust, feel good about.
Yes, chemistry and culture trumps all. I always say it's like real estate: location, location, location. Chemistry, culture, chemistry and culture, chemistry and culture. Don't deviate from that, and go with your gut.
And in fact, I just worked on 2 different transactions. One was a high trust transaction. And in fact, we're not to the finish line, but the person yesterday said, we get so much stuff done every time. And the reason that we get it done, a lot of things done every time, is we have a similar vision, a similar goal. We trust each other. And so it's very easy to move very quickly. I was involved in a low trust transaction, and every word and every sentence had to be interpreted, had to be discussed, had to be put through the filter of, how am I getting screwed by this other person? And that is really what the filter was. And so if you don't have chemistry and culture, every day becomes harder going into the future. And not only the deal gets harder, but what about after the deal, when people aren't on their best behavior?
That's right. As we say doing the deal is like 9 months of pregnancy. And once the deal is done, now you're raising the child, and that's forever. And, this is not like, okay, let me just walk away and move on to my next transaction. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done to make a transaction successful. And when you have those difficulties, and you're dealing with someone that does not have that open mindset, that low trust, walk away. Just not worth it.
And so, one of the things that I want to talk about with Phil today is Phil did 22 meetings over the last month where there was a P firm generally, or it could have been a CPA firm that's that's backed by some sort of funding mechanism, but 22 firms that appear to be PE firms and with sellers, right? So you've spent that much time. I have to believe that's probably more time than almost all our listeners have spent together, including the leaders of the PE firms, perhaps. And one of the great things that Phil has is if you're a leader of a PE firm and you are in 22 meetings, your message is the same during those 22 meetings. Your model is the same. Phil probably was involved with 10 different PE firms as well during those 22 meetings. Next month, we'll check that. And so not only he hears the models, he hears the feedback from the sellers as well. So Phil, why don't you share some highlights of some of the lessons you learned, some of the things you saw over the last month or so with your 22 plus meetings? And for our audience, 22 is a slow month for Phil. Yeah, I'm going to have to kick his butt if that continues a little bit.
Well, you do have to remember, David, I did take off the whole first week of January. I spent it in Florida this year.
Yeah.
So it was a rather short month for me, but
All right,
so that
so
was
22 isn't so bad then. I
so
forgot about you taking the first
yes.
week.
So 22, in those meetings, as David said, that was where there was a buyer and a seller, or an investor and someone who might be seeking such an investment. In addition to that, every month I meet with 30 managing partners of different CPA firms, and I also meet with about 20 different private equity leaders. At first, when you said 22 meetings in a month, I was like, wait a minute, I usually am doing, 15 to 17 meetings a day. How's it only 22? But that
You know
caveat,
what, Phil? Let me interrupt you for a second because I just want to share with the audience something we're going to do, right? So, we have all this knowledge and all these meetings, and you only get the knowledge if you keep on sitting into meetings. You learn, it takes a while to get it through. And so, our goal is by November, we're going to write a book about everything P and everything CPA and PE and look for that again. It's all about education, lessons, and advice that we can give our audience. So sorry to interrupt you, Phil, but
no,
excited to share that.
no, that's great. And thank you for that plug. Yes, we'll probably be in hopefully short order once we're, at least have our first transcript. We will probably put up a pre-order for those of you who might like to, get some first copies of this. But very excited about that, David. So let me tell you a little bit about what I've been seeing in these meetings with, investors and CPA firms that they are looking to invest in. Although a lot of times, people are still using the term buyers and sellers. I like to say that, yeah, you're selling some of your equity and private equity or strategic investor is buying it. But the reality is they're making an investment in you and the something special that you have built. And when I look at what many firms have built, there are people who have built wonderful firms that are 2.5 million in revenue. And they earn a very, very nice living. They put a significant percentage to the bottom line. But then there are firms, obviously, that have grown significantly larger. They're 20 million, 30 million. A lot of those firms are disappearing. Many of them that we work with are not on any of the lists. You won't find them on Accounting Today. You won't find them on Inside Public Accounting. They just don't report their results. But here's what we're seeing from the investor side. We've been seeing an uptick in multiples for smaller firms. Okay. When I had a call with someone last week, managing partner of a firm that's doing about 16 million with multiple offices, and I told him we were seeing an uptick in multiples. He's like, really? He goes, I thought multiples were going down. And I said, well, why would you think that? He goes, well, there just hasn't been a lot of activity. Haven't been seeing any big announcements. The reality is those are coming. The truth of the matter is private equity, family offices, wealth management firms, their strategy, and I think for 2026, I've been talking about this, is let's tuck into some of the foundational firms we already have. So everyone's looking at the smaller firm. So if it's a firm, a sole owner of $1 million practice, there's activity. There's more than one buyer. Typically, for every potential seller that we're working with, there's 3 or 4 letters of intent that end up being delivered. Obviously, when we initially meet with firms, we make a determination whether or not they're private equity eligible. And, you got to have enough profits so that there could be a scrape of compensation to create EBITDA.
And many firms are not, right?
And
It's
many
not
firms are not.
100% that are ready for private equity.
That is so true. So, coming from the buyers, we know that they're seeing tremendous competition. We also know that they have recognized that for the past 2 to 3 years, their corporate development departments have absolutely slammed managing partners of CPA firms of all sizes, trying to get meetings. And managing partners will tell you there's not a day or a week that goes by that I'm not receiving half a dozen phone calls, half a dozen or more emails about someone wanting to invest in the firm. I believe some of the larger groups understand that firms have been hammered. They're letting up a little on that outreach, but that is not indicative of a lack of their thirst for and their lack of attraction for all of these CPA firms. I think they just don't want to feel like they're an annoyance. As a matter of fact, I met with a firm yesterday, yes, on a Sunday, and one of the things that they said to me, "Hey, Phil, even though we've already met with this CPA firm and we think, we might have a framework to get a transaction done," they said, "We'd like you to work with them on our behalf and engage with them and see if you can, help us get that to the finish line." So now here's a case where we did not identify the firm. We did not introduce the firm, but they want us to go in and educate the firm on all of the different opportunities out there because they truly believe that, they've got, what's that expression? The best thing since sliced bread, you know? So
So Phil, you talked about, let's go backwards for a second. You talked about multiples going up for smaller firms. Excuse me. But let's make it real, right? So I'm a small firm and I have $500,000 worth of EBITDA, right? Scraped EBITDA. And I'm getting a four, right? So that's 2 million, right? I get a 4.5, that's 2.5 million, correct? Did I do my math right?
I believe you did.
So, Phil says multiples are going up a little bit, going up half a turn, in that case represents a 25% increase. Again, if I'm doing the math correctly, and Phil's the CPA on this call, so I might not be. But, so Phil's talking multiples going up a little bit, but they'll need to go up a lot to be massively impactful for our listeners and their families and their firms and all their other stakeholders. And I just wanted to put that into a little bit of perspective.
Yeah, no, and that's really very, very insightful, David. Moving a half a turn or a turn could be hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, depending upon the size of the deal. And, we've been involved in over 40, the exact number is 42 transactions with private equity and other strategic investors. And the ones we're working with, we know just how far we're able to push them. But even without our pushing, I recently was informed of a transaction, a firm that I would say a year ago, I'd be betting at most they'd be getting a 7 or a 7.5, definitely not an 8. A little bit more than $2 million of leave behind EBITDA. And that firm is getting a 10. So imagine going from a 7 or 7.5 a year ago to a 10 this year. That's a difference on a firm of that size of $5 million. Getting a 10 on 2 million of EBITDA is total enterprise value of 20 million. Getting a 7.5 is 15. That 5 million, even if they're only buying 60% of your firm, that's an extra $3 million that you can get just because in the course of a year. Now, this firm does have some secret sauce. They're highly niche. They're in a nice geography. They've got young succession in place. Every reason a firm would be given a multiple outside of where we normally would expect. happened to be present in this particular case. Even a smaller uptick, on a firm like that, a one turn, we're going, from a transaction of a 7.5 to an 8.5. It's a lot of money.
Yeah. So I just didn't want people to think like a half a turn, right? We're getting a 6% discount at Amazon. No, we're talking real money and significant money.
But I think there's also a lot of flexibility that comes with that because you remember one of the things that I will stand by this statement 100 times out of 100. It's not just about the multiple. Okay. It's not just that you're getting a high multiple. It's what are they considering as adjustments to that EBITDA after the scrape? What sort of add backs are you getting? Are you maximizing total enterprise value? And what we're seeing when I say there's tremendous flexibility, we're seeing investors now saying, "Hey, you know what? At 300,000 of new business that you brought in the fourth quarter of the year, we're going to give you credit for that, even though you didn't collect a penny and none of that added to your profitability for 2025. We're going to value it on the come, on the fact that we know it's going to hit next year. Now, some firms will do an earnout, but we have seen that flexibility where some organizations are giving credit for EBITDA that is yet to be created or achieved.
And again, that goes to, that there's a lot of buyers out there. And there's a lot of sellers too, but every seller is very attractive and there's multiple buyers who typically they're a good fit for. Because again, our starting point, chemistry, culture, and then is this the right fit for you, right? And all those other things. So Phil, as we wrap up, this is 1 month and maybe next month we'll talk about the 20 P firms that you speak to on a regular basis without sharing any secrets. But any other things that you'd like to add about your 20 plus meetings that you sat in and
Yeah.
facilitated and guided?
Yeah, sure. So, I've most of the chatting I've done thus far has been about what we've been seeing on the investor side. Let's talk about some of the things that I've been seeing from the CPA firms that were sitting in those meetings. And for some of them, they were first meetings that, typically I would say, look, why don't you take a meeting? They take a meeting, they get excited. I'm like, in order for you to really find out about what this could look like, let's sign an NDA. Let's get to the investor 5, 6, 7, 10 pieces of information so they can come back to you and say, hey, subject to full due diligence, this is what a transaction might look like. And the reaction that I've gotten from firms, some of those firms that I met with this past month, I think number one, a significant surprise when they become fully educated. Oh my goodness, I've been like an ostrich with my head in the sand. It's kind of amazing if true. And then when we say that if true, that's when we're like, all right, you know, go on, take a next step. I think there's also been an openness and a willingness to explore. And I always say to our clients, the sellers, I say, you want to get to know, not know. You want to get to KNO. You want to know as much as you can. And you know what? After you meet with someone and you love them and you love what they hear, there have been times where it's been, sort of like, I'm going to say the one hit wonder, like they meet one firm and that's it. That's all. I always say, oh, it's much better for you from a negotiating perspective to ultimately, when you're making a final decision, is not to just go with that first thing because it sounds so good, but to have multiple indications of interest, letters of intent, memorandums of understanding, whatever you want to call it, but you want to be able to compare them side by side. And it gives you a great ability to negotiate and ultimately, achieve, even better results than you saw in that first meeting.
And I also think, right, I have found as people have these meetings, as they get LOIs, they become a lot more educated. And the whole deal starts to make sense to them rather than just what's the multiple, right? And so I think by meeting multiple people, and I think, my analogy is like buying a house. Sometimes you got to see the wrong to know, hey, I don't want to split, right? Because that doesn't feel right to me. I want a colonial. And I think by meeting different people, you're just exposed to different models and you feel better about selecting one of them.
Absolutely. And David, we keep saying, we can't say it enough, that we are all about education. And on that note, one of the things I'm going to leave you with, and I'm going to make a comment after I say this. When I was 7 or 8 years old and graduating from, the first or second grade, I had an autograph book and I found it in a box the other day. And my grandmother, Grandma Gertrude, who was my mother's mom, she lived until she was 97 and she had all her marbles up until the very end. I saw what she wrote in my book. And in my book, she wrote, study, study, study until you grow old. A good education is better than gold. Silver and gold may vanish away, but a good education will never decay. Now, what I see and what I interpret that and what we're going through in this investors looking at the public accounting marketplace, we educate you, and that silver and gold doesn't vanish away. It actually arrives in a wheelbarrow, and it's like that pot of gold at the end of a rainbow.
Love it. And again, education's so important. So I want to thank our audience again for spending some time with us today. We're here to help you. If you like what we're saying, we love likes, we love subscribes, we love questions. We do educate. And again, it would be hard for you to have 22 meetings between buyers and sellers and hear all those different nuances. But this is Phil's life, but it's also Dave Kell's life and Walter Brash's life and Rick on our team. And so, we're moving to HubSpot, so I'll be able to give this information next year at some point. But, our team has probably 75 meetings a month between buyers and sellers, and sitting in there and helping facilitate and helping to guide our sellers. So on behalf of Phil and myself, I just want to thank everybody. Go crush the day, and we're here to help you. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into Everything CPA and Private Equity. Every episode brings fresh insight. However, there's always more to talk about.
Don't miss an episode. Subscribe wherever you watch podcasts. Have a question or topic you'd like us to cover? We'd love for you to reach out to us.
Together, we will help you navigate this dynamic landscape so that we can help you achieve your goals. Until next time, keep making moves that matter.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.